Hey there, let's continue with the course on developing with Camera Raw. Today we're going to see how to make use of the possibilities that a RAW file gives us to get the most out of it. We have conditions like a lot of contrast, not much light, or too much light. So let's choose from here some of the photos that could be good for us to play around with. Like this one, where we can see the lights are a little over output, and we'll compare it with one where we have a little less exposition. Let's give it a category, a different colored one. We'll select the photos in Bridge that we're going to work with, like some that are like this with a lot of contrast, where we can see that the shadows and the lights are very contrasted. And well, I think that these three to start with, we're good. We'll click here to select the yellow filter, and we'll select the three with Control-Alt or clicking and dragging, and we'll tell the program to open them in Camera Raw. Once we have them here, as we've seen before, now we can clip and straighten. We've seen a little over the top the save or the workflow window, and now we're going to start to get into details on how to develop the photo. Up here, we can see the histogram of this photo, and we can verify that when we go over it, it divides up into 5 different zones. Those 5 zones that we can see here in gray, a little darker when they're on them, correspond to the 5 zones that we can work on. So the light and this central block on the basic development panel, this will be the exposition. That's going to make the halftones of the photograph, so not like the shadows or the light, it's going to make them clearer if we go to the right and darker if we go to the left. Next, if we go to the left, on the left side, we have the black tones. On the right, we would have the lights. On the right side, we have the white tones. Those regulators are here, next to the contrast ones. For example, in a photo like this, where we can see that we have an excess of lights right here, so that's all the way on the right. Well, here the histogram is going to tell us that there's too much information. And if the histogram was all the way on the right side, it would be telling us that this area is burnt. What we can see here is that there's a lot of information or pixels on the right side. But lowering the exposition a little bit and lowering a little the highlights and lowering the whites a little, we can recover at least a part of the information that we'd lost. Now, instead of having a white wall, we have a wall that's kind of a cream color. Still very bright because the sun is bouncing off it, but as we can see in the histogram, we've been able to recover some of the textures on the wall. And now it's not a burnt wall, it's very bright. It's cream, it's a nice colored wall. But it's not white with no texture. If we put the photo here to fit the preview box, we can see in this button here below the before and the after. And we can see that how we've recovered the texture, at least in most of the photo that was burnt. This adjustment that we've modified here, we did it by lowering the exposition of the medium tones. We could leave this setting at 0 and lower the lights even more, but we'll get to a moment when, just with the illuminations, where we're not going to be able to recover it. We're not going to recover all the details we want from the light. So this is why I decided to touch the exposition a little bit. If we touch the exposition in some way, it's going to affect as well, although not much, the darkest area of the photo, which is the shadows. Here we can see the original photo and the photo that comes after. We can see that we haven't just changed the lights here in the sign. Well, we can see that it's very clear, and also the shadows have become a little bit darker. It's not a problem because if we want to find some details in this shadow area, there's a regulator that's going to allow us to illuminate just that part. When we go up and take it to the right in the shadow area, we have more information there without affecting the rest of the image. That's the light areas or, the whites. So if we want to get a little bit more light, we can take this regulator to the right and see how we're recovering information that was there and was too dark to see. If we zoom in and we take the photo to 100%, we can see the before and the after. In the before picture, this bit had too much light. This area had a lot of light. This part was a bit too dark. And now we have a little bit more light in the dark area and less light in all those light areas. If we put the photo back to full view, we can see the before and the after. Before, after. We have a better spread of the shadows and a better spread of the lights. If we look at the histogram, we have information from level 0 to level 255. With this, well, the light spread in the photo is correct. So, something we can do when we've adjusted the light in the photo as we want to is decide what temperature we want the color in the photo to have. Right now, it's in the mode that we took it with the automatic white balance, and we can choose any of the white balances that are presets in the program. Just like in the camera, we have automatic, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, or custom. If we want to put it in daylight, for example, we'll see that the photo is taken on a whole warm tone. If we were to put it in fluorescent, the photo will go on to take on an even colder tone, like with the tungsten. Or if we put it in the shade, the photo would have an even warmer tone. There isn't a perfect or unique white balance, especially when their photo is taken of an outside area or of a landscape. It's something that you have to make in an interpretation of the colors or tones we want our photo to have, you know? When we use the regulator to our own devices, we can go to a custom white balance mode. If we wanted to make a balanced, using a gray or a pure white as a reference, we could use this tool here, the dropper tool, used to balance the whites. And once we have it selected, click on some of the areas as a reference. That could maybe be the shadows in a neutral area, like here. So if we balance that shadow, the rest of the photo will balance out with that shadow. When we click on any point, what we're telling it to do is that we want a balance between red, green, and blue on that point. So if I click on a green area, and in the green area, green is a dominant color, I'm telling the program that in that green area, there should be a balance. It should become a gray area. So the green level will go down whilst the red and blue will go up. So you'll see a photo with altered colors. This tool works well when we have a gray or white area for reference. If you can't find an area to use as reference, we can always use, amplifying the photo, a shadow area in some part of the photo, in which there wasn't a previous color in the photo. For this reason, I clicked here on this shadow area, or in this shadow area here. They're neutral walls, and if you have a shadow, and shadows are normally gray, and if the gray is balanced, the photo should be balanced. However, the white balance can be adjusted here manually, going a little to the right to get a little more of a warmer tone. From the settings the white balance tool gave us, or taking it to the left to get a little more of a cooler tone. So we can always personalize it and leave it however we need to. The tint, which is below, you can adjust the light a little with this tool. It's more for artificial light sources, but if we think the shadows have more of a magenta or greenish tone, we can correct them here. Going to the side opposite to the dominant one we have in that particular area. In this case, well, we would have the photo correctly balanced. We just have to work on the last part of this first tag of the basic development, and that's the part that has to do with the photo's definition. It makes the micro contrasts and the edges of the objects in photos better, and the color treatment, so the color strength. Let's first look at the clarity. To see this, I'm going to zoom in on the photo, and we can go to an area down here where we have objects that have lines and edges that are contrasted. The clarity is going to augment the contrast in local areas in clearer pixels with those that are darker. This gives us an image with a little more definition. We can see that here, moving the regulator to the right, we get the image's edges to contrast more, so it looks like on a global scale, we set the photo to a field view, and it looks like it has a better definition. We go from here to here. We're going to separate the lights and shadows, and that will give us some better defined edges. Hence the name clarity, because it gives us a sensation that the image is a bit clearer, as if we clean the lens. If we take the regulator to the right side, that augmentation in the microcontrast and the clarity makes the photo start to have a more digital treatment look, or like an illustration. It's getting further and further away from reality, so it's not really recommendable to take it to that level. No matter how popular this is on the internet to see photos of this style, it's not something that's very realistic, so we can make the photo's definition better without taking it too far. Then we have the intensity and saturation regulators. What the intensity does is give the colors that have some saturation, so the greens and blues, it gives them a little more strength. So the oranges and the rocks as well. This will make the photo a little more visually striking. Saturation will give strength to all of the colors independently from whether they're saturated or not, and it can be really peculiar, to not say that it can destroy a little of the way the colors work. If we go to the left, we're doing the absolute opposite. We're making a desaturation of these colors, taking away the purity and the color information in the photo until we leave it in gray. So if the saturation is below -100, in intensity we can move it, it's not going to affect the photo at all. However, in saturation, we left it where it was at 0. The intensity can be lowered and we'll keep some colors, the ones with the most purity, and we can increase it without taking the risk of ruining the photos. Well, at least if we don't take it all the way to the extremes, to the right. But we can play a little from 0, going to the right, to give a little more strength to the colors that already have some saturation. If you want to give the saturation a little more of a push to saturate the colors a little more, you don't really have to go higher than 10. Any higher than that, and we can start to ruin the photo, and we're going to get some colors that shouldn't be there. Okay, so there we would have the first basic development of this photo, and if I want to move it to the next photo that hasn't been developed yet, well, I can do that. We're going to see how to do that now. When we have a photo developed and we want to move that same development or a similar one to another photo that hasn't been developed yet, all we have to do is select both photos, put them both in view, the one we've developed in view, and go to these lines here where it says Film Strip. Click here and let's hit Sync Settings. And the window we get there will be where we decide if we want to synchronize all of it. We would sync all of the parameters of all of the panels or parameters of a certain panel. For example, parameters like the ones in the white balance, or parameters in the basic panel, or parameters in the details panel, or some more concrete parameters. I'm going to choose the ones from the basic panels. I'm going to sync everything except for the ones that affect the light in the image, as they're two photos with different lights. But I'm going to leave the sync between the first and the second on the white balance, the clarity, the intensity, and the saturation. Let's see what happens. We can see here the sign that, a warning sign that tells us that both photos have the same adjustments when it comes to color temperature. We can see it here, the same color temperature, the same clarity, the same intensity, and the same saturation. Obviously, as the others have different exposition, well, we can see that they have different lights. And what I want to show you now is how important it is to expose a photo correctly. Given that if I were to go back to this photo, or take this photo back to its original form, hitting here on Camera Raw, and then Defaults, the photo is no longer developed, and I want to point out that here in this photo, we did not expose the histogram correctly, so that we wouldn't burn the lights. We were a bit off, and the shadows are a bit sub-exposed. So let's make a develop now from scratch, as if we hadn't already done this one before. And we're going to try and reach this level of clarity and contrast that we have in this photo. Firstly, I'm going to adjust the color balance. It doesn't need to be an adjustment from top to bottom. We don't have to start developing the photo from the white balance and then the exposition and then the color settings. Generally speaking, I start developing from the part I care the most about. And right now, I want to get rid of this blue, magenta. Now, what I can... I'm going to give some more warmth to the photo, and I'm going to take away some magenta. Now what I can see is that it's a sub-exposed photo. The color isn't too bad as it was before, but the photo is still lacking light. So what I'm going to do is first add some light to the exposition. I'm going to be looking here, increasing the color temperature, and I'm going to give some light to the shadows. So that way the shadows have just a little bit more light. I'm going to take away a little bit of light from the illuminations and a little bit of whites where I'm going to give it some contrast. And I'm going to go back to the color temperature where I'm going to make it a little bit warmer. Now I can give it some clarity and I'm going to give it some more intensity. I'm trying to get the photo down here to look like this one up here. Obviously, the one on the top has more light, which gives us more information with which to work. They're not two photos that are the same. The one on the top is much, much better. It could also be that I changed the moment when I took it, and here I can see that there's a little less contrast. It could be that there was a cloud in that moment covering the sun. Well, we can see two photos that are similar, but they're not the same. The problem is that in the second photo, I had to increase the exposition and the shadows so that they were more or less the same as in the first photo. Now, if I amplify both areas, let's amplify an area here where there are some shadows, and let's show both photos. This is the photo that had enough light. This photo, when we develop it, looked like this. And now we've left it like this. And if we amplify this one to 200% in that area, we're going to try and see the same area. It's around here. We're going to see that it doesn't have the same sign. It doesn't have the same quality as in the first photo. Here we can see how it was darker and we've had to make it clear. In the first photo, we can see now when it adjusts, we can see how it was. And we haven't really had to give it a lot of light. We just had to change the color and the clarity. But we didn't have to increase the illumination in this area because it was already quite well exposed. This didn't happen in the second one. So now in the second photo, now when it adjusts, we can see how the definition is much worse. And if we were to amplify it to 400%, we're going to see that there's quite a lot of noise in this picture. We'll get rid of that noise later, but with this, we can see that they don't have the same quality in both photos. The conclusion is that it's better to expose with more light. So it's better to go to a photo that has a little bit too much exposition, but doesn't burn the lights, so that it doesn't go too white. And then when we develop it, we recover the information. It looks like this. So we don't have to overexpose a photo because it's lacking light. And then later we get in the shadows a lot of noise. So the best thing to do is to always have enough light so that the photo comes out in the right conditions. In photos like this one that have a high level of contrast, well, what we want to do in the development process is to try and clear up the area of shadows and make sure it doesn't affect the light areas. We could even get rid of this, a little light of this area so that it doesn't look so burnt around the sun. So, if we look here at the histogram, we can see that we've exposed this in such a way that the lights don't burn altogether. A little bit here in the red channel that corresponds to the sun. Obviously, whenever we shoot the sun, we're going to have a burnt area in our photo. This area here, the dark one, corresponds with all this part here in the photo. So, the left area is the shadows, the right area is the light, the area in the middle, the midtones, that correspond in this case to the sky. As we know that we have a regulator for each area of the light in the photo, we can just adjust the regulator, or we could go to the histogram and drag it left or right to the area we want to work on. For example, if I want to make it so that the lights are a little clearer, I'll click here on the histogram, take the regulator to the right, and if you look closely in the shadows, we can see the regulator move to that area, and the information is starting to show up. When I let go, I'll be left with this, with more information. I can take it to the extreme, and I would have a light that didn't exist before. Being able to get more or less information from here when it was originally dark, practically black, depends on the size of the sensor, the camera's dynamic range, the ISO we took the photo with. So like the less ISO we have, the more light goes in, and the more the light, the more adjustments I can do without damaging the quality. If I'd had this photo at ISO 400 instead of ISO 80, well, I would have had something different. Okay, so we've gone from here to here. I have light now in the shadows, and I'm going to try and to take away a little bit of light, decreasing the illumination and lowering the whites a little bit. As the photo looks a little bit sad when I increase the shadows as it lacks contrast, let's increase the contrast a little bit more and the micro contrast in the clarity. This will make the photo a little more realistic. We're going to give it more intensity to the colors without making them look too strange. And we can see here the before and the after, and we can see how they've gained. Not just in the shadows, where there was nothing at all before, but also in the light areas. To make it a little bit better, we could increase the exposition, which would give a little more light to the sky. This area here in the sun is still burnt, but below it's going to gain a lot. So maybe the final development would be this one here, where we can see how we've made the sky a little bit better. And also the shadow area where we have things where before it was just black. If we zoom in and we put it at 100% to see if we have any noise or not, we're going to see that, yeah, we do have quite a lot of noise. We have a lot of noise. We can see it here in the rock, which is full of green and magenta dots, that in a class a little further on, we'll learn how to clean and leave it as if there were no noise at all. But that noise is there, and it's evident that from this area pretty much black to this area with light and detail, we can't go from one to the other without giving something in exchange, just like in alchemy. The price we paid to have light is that now we have quite a bit of noise. This noise is going to depend, I insist, on the size of the sensor we have on our camera, the dynamic range, and most of all, the level of ISO with which we took the photo. We'll see how to clean that noise so that the photo is perfect in a class further on down the road. For now, we've learned the basic tools of the basic development panel, and we're going to continue in the next class seeing the rest of the panels in Camera Raw. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll see you guys in the next class. Bye!